Today, we are going to have a conversation with Dr. George James. We're going to have that conversation where we can dive into untreated trauma and hopefully uncover why there's so many things going on with our youth today in the city of Philadelphia and beyond. Welcome to the show, Dr. James.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Let's just dive right in. We are seeing some scary times in the city of Philadelphia. Let's talk about untreated trauma and how it can yield to, we'll say, people not knowing how to understand how to solve problems. So we're looking at not being able to resolve conflict in a manner of us talking to each other. So let's talk about the effects of untreated trauma. When you're talking about children coming up to adults, but also what's going on with like the teens in the city of Philadelphia.
I think this is a really important topic. And as you mentioned, the city of Philadelphia has been just dealing with a lot of um, violence, a lot of pain, a lot of trauma. And to your point, probably, I think many professionals would say untreated trauma. And then there's the vicarious trauma, meaning the people who are experiencing it, but not necessarily maybe fully live in it. There's people who are like, they feel more anxious coming into the city versus the people who live in the areas where lots of things are going. So those are both folks could have trauma, but experience it in different ways. One of the things that I think about often that was kind of shared with me, they're no longer working in the city, but Dr. Ted Corbin many years ago was a part of developing an organization called Healing Hurt People.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a phrase that hurt people hurt people, and so when you say undiagnosed or untreated trauma, I think about, well, those are hurt people. Those are people who are dealing with pain and challenges. And so I bring up Dr. Ted Corbin because their organization with Dr. John Rich and others that was really about helping people who were hurt. And they would share this statistic of people who were assaulted, people who were shot, people who were in really difficult situations like that would go to the hospital, get treated, and then would be released on the same day. Just imagine what it means to be shot, to be stabbed, to be assaulted, and for the physical wound to be dealt with, but not the emotional, not the mental toll, not the trauma, and then be released to go back to wherever you came from, which is probably where the incident happened.
Right. Right.
So I'm just saying that's just an example of that. There's a lot of untreated trauma that is just around. And sometimes we're just letting people go back to the places where they were traumatized without dealing with the actual specific situation.
I agree. Now let's touch on these teens. The teens look like you and me. So I get alerts all the time, which is heartbreaking alerts of a 15-year-old who was shot multiple times throughout the body in the head, a 16-year-old who was shot multiple times throughout the body in the head. Doc, how does a teen actually kill another teen? I can't wrap my mind around that.
Yeah, I can't wrap my mind around that either, but that's also because of, my context, right? Like I grew up adjacent to some of the stuff going down, but I wasn't in it, right? Like, and so what, when I say normalize, meaning like what people experience, I know people I've worked with where they told me like, yeah, I saw my first dead body before I was 10, right? Like that was just kind of something that happened or experienced, or some folks that said to me, hey, like, yeah, by like 15 or 18, I already lost 3 or 4 people that I was close to, where death is normalized, death of young folks, death of friends is almost expected. And so that wasn't my experience, right? Like, it wasn't until later, maybe in my early 20s, maybe I lost a friend, and that was still an anomaly, not something that was a normal thing for the folks in my friend group. So that is why I say, like, I can't wrap my head around it. And I think, what, to your point, your question, what I see that happens for folks is lots of things, right? Sometimes they might have a lot of time on their hands. Sometimes it might be who their friends are. Maybe sometimes it's the people they look up to, the big brother or cousin or role model, and what that person's into, you then get yourself into. And like most of these, everywhere, every group has a way for you to get in. Every clique, every organization, there's a way that you become a part of. And sometimes to become a part of, you have to not have boundaries or not have lines or be willing to cross those lines. And sometimes those lines are violence. Or sometimes it's just the nature of the business, right? Some people who get, from just the people I've worked with, people who get involved in sometimes uh, drugs or other activities, that part of that job comes violence, right? That you can't just deal drugs and not expect to be robbed or to be have some negative situation. It's a part of the territory. So when we add all those factors, it becomes, unfortunately, something that is normal and used to, but still traumatizing, still has a toll that it takes on an individual, a family, and a community.
That's true. Now, how can one become desensitized at such a young age?
Yeah, desensitization is the really the experience of doing something over and over and over and over and over again, or being a part of something multiple times, that you minimize it, right? And even as small as, like, people who live, like, in the city, like any city across the world, there's more noise that you will hear in the city than you might hear in maybe the suburbs. Or if you're on a rural, like, farm, like, you might hear the animals. After a while, you forget that the animals are making noise. After a while, you forget the sound of the train or the siren. And people will say they leave the city and go to somewhere quiet, and they're like, it's too quiet, because they are so normal to the sounds that's around them. They've become desensitized to it. And once again, if before you're 10, before you're 15, you've heard gunshots, you know the difference between a car backfiring and a gunshot, right? Because you've heard it so much. You've had to know which way to walk, because if you walk a certain way, you could put yourself at harm. You know how to carry yourself because of the level of violence. And after a while, you forget that you know that, and now you go in a new environment and you are doing the same things because you've been desensitized. And so, unfortunately, some of this is, what are the levels of change or intervention or access to a different opportunity? Sometimes it's education, sometimes it's employment, sometimes it's mentorship, sometimes it's all the above, but sometimes some folks don't have those options.
You're right. And like you said, sometimes people do not have those options, and unfortunately they make choices that are not good. So tell me something, Doc, how do you propose we, and I'm saying we as advocates, how do you propose we touch those youth so they can make different decisions? Now, there's often times where, I've been in the victim services world for well over 8 years, and I would get frustrated seeing the same people at the meeting. It's like you're preaching to the choir.
Yeah.
We need to have those troubled youth at the meeting. We need to have the shooters at the meeting. We need to have those who are doing things that are not right within the community. To me, they don't often have the right people at the table. How do we reach the youth? Like you said, sometimes it's by choice, and sometimes people just seek them, or sometimes they may see a role model. And I've often said, if there's a child who may see his dad or may see his brother or may see his uncle who's selling drugs, how does he know that's not right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's the household he was brought up in. But how do we save those children? How do we save those children who are probably recruited into a gang? How do we save those children that don't even have a choice because the gang is going to find them and make them join the gang? How do we make a change in the city of Philadelphia with our youth today?
Yeah, that is such a big challenge and a big question. But there's a few thoughts that I have. One, I think we also have to address the difficulties that the quote unquote helper deals with, right? That there's a lot of folks who are anxious and nervous about being the helper because they are afraid. And that's respectable. Like, it's understood, right? That they're afraid that, well, if I do kind of say, hey, young man, young woman, this is not the way to do it, will they retaliate? Will they do something? Will they harm me? And I've heard lots of people who've shared sentiments of their fear and anxiety, and especially as the violence has become so pervasive, the choice that people make is, it's safer for me not to get involved. And that's sad, but also understandable. And so I think, like, it's okay, how do we inspire or impact or influence those people? Because what happens is, there are plenty of young men and young women who are surrounded by gangs, surrounded by violence, not receiving up-to-date textbooks, not getting the proper instruction that they need, and are finding ways to thrive and to excel. And if you were to ask some of them, they would say, well, they got involved, maybe through academics, maybe through sports, maybe they had a mentor, or all those things, and they were able to find their way out. But I think it's a coupling of that, is what is the unique thing about that person, that young individual that found their way out, that had all the choices but somehow didn't, and what are the ways of the people that somehow push past their anxiety and say that they're going to love and care and show up for these young folks, so that they aren't left with the examples that are maybe not the best for them. And I think if we somehow can figure that out, maybe we can make a dent in the problem, because I think a lot of these young folks are just looking for love, connection, opportunity. Even with some of the ones that I've worked with, they would say, often, like, I'm not dealing drugs because I just want to deal drugs. I'm dealing drugs because, like, my mom needs something. My mom is struggling, and I'm the only one that can do something. And this is what I feel like is the only option. But I'm sad or depressed or anxious or traumatized and unsure of what to do.
Right. And I've also often said that in meetings, we never ask the question of what they need. We're not listening to them. And I used to say that, are they selling drugs because they have to, or are they selling drugs because they want to? So I agree that we have to speak to them. We have to give them the resources that they need to be able to be successful in whatever they want to do. And I don't know if that's always being done, but again, times have changed, Doc. You know what I mean? I'm young, but I'm old. So, back in the day, the drug dealer didn't wreak havoc on the neighborhood.
Yeah.
We didn't agree with what they was doing. Let's be clear about that.
Yeah.
But they helped the senior citizens if they saw them coming in the house with bags. They made sure nothing was going to go down when any children were around. And if there was youngins around, they would tell them, yo, go ahead in the house.
Mm-hmm.
But they wouldn't have them around.
Yeah.
Today, there is no regard for human life for some. And it seems like there's no respect. Like, the young boys in the game are not respecting the OGs. It is what it is, having this conversation.
Yeah.
So a lot of stuff has has changed. And again, I'm not saying all young people are bad, because there are some great and amazing young people who are doing amazing things, but it just seems like, this spike in what's going on with these young people. And then I have a grandfather who, unfortunately, his grandson was murdered in front of his door.
Mm.
That grandson had a twin sister, and they were coming home. I think they worked at the McDonald's off of Rosinson, and they lived in East Mount Airy. And the grandfather, he allowed me to share his story. But here it is that his grandson was shot multiple times right by his twin sister going in the house,
Mm.
and he passed away.
Mm.
It was on social media. And after the homicide occurred, whoever this was that did it recorded a song about the shooting.
Wow.
But the grandfather found out some things about his grandson that he never knew. And he said his thing was, only if I made more time for my grandson. And he was a good granddad. He's raising his grandchildren. Unfortunately, their mother had passed away, and I think their father passed away also. But he was raising his grandson. But he said, if only I knew. So there are some good parents out here that don't know some of the things that their children are into, but then you have some of the parents that, I don't know, condone it or whatever. But what advice would you have for those parents that are doing the best that they can, and their children are in some things that are not good?
The challenge is, and this is just with like young adulthood period, that time just time on your hands makes you do some stuff that sometimes you shouldn't, right? You start experimenting, you start trying things out, going to different places because you just have time. Now, I'm not saying that you need to have every minute of the day like buttoned up and scheduled, but I think that's often the struggle, right? If you have a parent or grandparent who's working, sometimes working maybe one or two jobs, and they really don't have the time, that means there's extra time or open time that's left for the young adult. And if there isn't a coach or teacher or someone else who's intervening in their life, they start to look for stuff, and somehow it's easier to find themselves in questionable situations. And so for the parents out there, part of what I would say is, even what we try to do in our own household is, if you my encouragement is always, can you be the first voice in your child or grandchild's life? Can you be the first place that they come to for help or support? And if you're unavailable, can the second source of information be someone you trust, someone in your tribe, in your community? Maybe that's an uncle or auntie, maybe that's a coach or someone else that that person and their values, and then you believe that those values are then being shared with your child or children. Because if not, they will get the information or experience from something or someone else. And sometimes it's going to be outside of your values or what you want for that child. And that's where I think it opens them up for some negativity. So, for the parents, it's tough, and you got to do what you have to do, but also cultivate the people they connect with. And the last thing I'll say to what you said earlier is that, yeah, there's always a new generation. And I think the phase that we're in now is that young folks are saying, you old heads have told us some stuff that are not true. So you know what? We're not doing it the way that you tell us anymore. We're going to do it our own way. And we see it from not respecting the OGs, all the way to, I'm not going to stay in the job forever, to, all these things that we see because they're saying, y'all lied to us. Y'all told us a bag of lies, and we believed it for a little bit, and it is not true. So we're going to do it our own way. And it has some really negative sides to it, and then some other sides of it that might be inspirational.
Right, right. And then we can't lose focus on or lose sight from where we came from, because we did some things that our parents told us not to do also. So, here it is. I brought up in the church, and, I'm supposed to be on a straight and narrow. And then, I meet my husband when I'm I'm 15, and my husband wasn't like my dad at the time. My dad's a deacon. He's a pastor now. He's a reverend now.
Right, right.
So they are like total
But he didn't
opposites.
start
But
that way.
no, he didn't. And look, my dad born and raised in North Philly. So yeah, before my dad was a deacon, he did some things that he
Right.
wasn't
That's
supposed
right.
to do. So as parents, we can't forget, where we came from, but we have to pray that our children, when they make these decisions, they can come back from the silly decisions that they made, because we all made them. So yeah, but we knew we had boundaries, and we knew we couldn't go but so far. You know what I'm saying? And I'll share this story. My middle brother will probably get upset with me. So my little brother is with one of his friends, and he's a teen. And his friend says, listen, I got this car, got my uncle's car. You want to come drive in my uncle's car? So he's like, yeah, okay. So they get in the car, they drive the car. So then they go down a couple of blocks, and then the guy says, you want to drive? My brother like, yeah, let me whip this bad boy. My brother has license none. Okay.
Mm.
So he's a teen. So he's driving this car. And what happens? My brother crashes the car. So he
Mm.
looks at his friend and says, oh my goodness, your uncle's going to be mad. So the friend looks at him and says, it's not my uncle's car.
Mm-hmm.
It's stolen.
Yep.
My brother's like, what? So of course, here comes the cops. They lock my brother up, lock this gentleman up. So when we laugh about this story today, my brother is successful in what he does. But my brother said, when he got to the police station, they said, okay, we're going to call your father. He said,
Mm-hmm.
keep me locked up. Don't call my dad. You know what I mean? So you have that healthy fear
Yeah.
of one of your parents, because oh,
Yeah.
if we come down here, and I'm a mommy and daddy's girl. I'm a daddy's girl true to heart. I love my daddy, but look, I still don't play with my daddy. You hear me? My daddy got arthritis and he's 80, but I know if he grip me up,
That's
that's
right.
it. So now let's talk about that. Don't you think it's good to have that healthy fear with your parents?
I think that I think it's really important to respect your parents, right? Like, and to the place where like, I don't want to disappoint you. That doesn't mean I don't live my life, but I
Right.
know that there are ways that like, I don't want to cross too many negative lines, and I respect you. I have that, as you mentioned, healthy fear, because I love you and I want you to recognize that. Now, at the same point, that fear shouldn't be because like I've created such a hostile environment, or
Oh yeah.
that right, and all those things, right? So just to be clear, but that the level of like, I love you and I care about you, and I know you would be disappointed, hurt, pissed, all the above, and
Right.
so I'm gonna really be careful. And to your point about being younger, yeah, I was really good with knowing where the line was and being real close to it, so close I could smell it. Like I'd be right there. And occasionally if I want to lean over, but like I knew, because of the, once again, the healthy fear and the respect of like, I knew my parents went through so much and
Right.
dealt with so much, and that to bring that on them would be like more than what they deserved, right? So like that level of respect for them, I didn't want to. Now, granted, everybody doesn't have that. Everybody doesn't have parents that they know love them, or kind to them, or gonna be there for them. So it's hard for some folks to have that fear. They actually sometimes have hurt or pain or
Yeah.
trauma from that parent.
Yeah. And that's a shame. And yeah, I'm being, very clear that and when I say that healthy fear, I'm not speaking about abuse, physical abuse going on in the home. Not saying that at all, but best believe that Reverend Dr. John L. Payne would discipline me
Yes.
or my two older brothers when we did something we had no business doing. And guess what? I love him for that, because like you said, you had that line.
Mm-hmm.
And you knew you might cross that line a little bit, but you're not going to stray too much, because
Yeah.
that healthy fear gave you that respect, that mad respect
Yeah.
that I have for my mother and my father. And I would never do anything to shame them
Yeah.
in any way. But trust me, I've done some things, you know what I mean, that they probably still don't know about to this day.
Right. Right.
But we didn't keep it that way. But yeah, I agree. Tell me something. Are there free And I'm in the victim services world, and there are community-based agencies throughout the city of Philadelphia. And I mainly deal with those affected by crime, whether it's a crime victim or a co-homicide survivor. But are there free therapy services for those who were not affected by a crime and that are just in need?
Yeah, the challenge with free is that it's really difficult. Like there are community agencies, and some of the challenges there might be a long wait line, or the people doing the work might have a large caseload. There are lots of places, lots of therapists that might say like they have subsidized services or they have a slide and scale fee. The place I used to work for, like they use interns where they're able to do $5, $10, $25. It's a place called Council for Relationships. There's times where even in my practice and some of my colleagues that there might be like one or two slots every now and then where it's reduced or free. Sometimes if someone's a student, there's always the student counseling center that's already wrapped up in your fees and tuition. So but for you, it will be free when you show up. So there are lots of avenues. I think that sometimes people are just not looking or willing to take those options. The other options is sometimes people's insurances might cover some of that. And at the end of the day, it's really being willing to go and find the resources and try them out and give yourself, one of the talks I say I have is give yourself permission to take care of yourself in that way, to try it and to see what happens.
And I think that's important because when you are traumatized and when you are going through and when you need someone to talk to, it's important, like Dr. James said, to get those resources because we care about you and we don't want you to do anything to anyone else. And we definitely don't want you to do anything to yourself. So,
Right.
Dr. George, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. Glad to be here. And any way that anyone wants to reach out to me, georgetalks.com or George Talks on Instagram and Twitter is a perfect way to find me.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We had a very important conversation. Your mental state matters. And for all of those young people, we care about you and we love you. So please be very conscious about the decisions that you make. Again, we love you. Peace and blessings.